A canon event for a lot of artists is absolutely loving a drawing and then a year or two, maybe a month later, being like, why did I think this was as good as it was? But out of that pain comes the beauty of redraws. Redraws are a perfect way to be able to honor your old art while seeing how you've improved. Sometimes we have really good compositional ideas, but we might not have the skill set to be able to fully execute it the way we see it in our heads. Or sometimes we just go through a stylistic change in our art. So redraws are perfect because it allows us to be able to revisit those old but good ideas. And as the elders say, reduce, reuse, Rikiki. This drawing, which has also been my profile picture on TikTok and Instagram for a really long time, was drawn back in 2022. And so I finally said, I must go henceforth and redraw it. And so I did. And then I didn't touch it for months, possibly a year. I cannot remember when I started this. It was either like earlier this year, possibly last year. It has been a while, but that's what today's video is going to be. It's a good old time lapse while we chit chat about redraws, seeing the improvement in your style and your skill, and also how weird it feels to touch a drawing you haven't worked on in months. But before we get into that, I do want to just mention our new little friend on the channel, if you would like to say hello. I wanted to try out a lavalier lapel mic. Although I didn't feel like the audio was horrible in my last video, it wasn't great. You'll have to let me know if you've watched last week's video and now this video, which sound you prefer, because I'm playing around a little bit. The first thing that I wanted to touch on was what I liked about the original drawing and wanted to carry into the redraw, and also the things I knew I wanted to change. To be a little bit kind to myself, because I think that's something us artists are not the greatest at, is cutting ourselves some slack. I feel like even at kind of the beginning of my digital art journey, maybe not like the very beginning, but when I look back at a lot of my artwork from 2021, 2022, I feel like I had a pretty good eye for composition and for color dynamics, and I still like a lot of the compositions of my older drawings, and I'll pop up a few on the screen of my favorites. But I knew I wanted to keep the composition the same, and I wanted to keep the colors because I really, really liked the colors of this one. But I did want to add just a little bit more of a pop of color, so instead of just doing a fully like orange fairy dragon, I wanted to add some iridescent wings, make it all nice and sparkly. I also wanted to adjust the outfit a little bit. She is wearing a nightgown, and I wanted to keep that the same, just add a little bit more detail, change the neckline up just a little bit. I also originally wanted to change up the facial expression for this drawing, and I started off changing it and then kind of by the end reverted to the original. And the last thing is I just wanted to change the ratio of the canvas because I wanted to make this one suitable for a print, because I am hopefully soon starting a print shop. So those were kind of like the main overarching things that I knew I wanted to change and then also keep the same. So the premise and the concept of this drawing was this elf being almost kind of in a dreamscape, that's why she's wearing a nightgown, happening upon this magical fairy dragon. And in the original drawing, I kind of had her more with like this trance look where you don't necessarily know if it's like a good mystified or if it's like a that's why she kind of has this glazed look over her eye. This was one of the things I knew I wanted to adjust with this drawing, because when I look back, every time I see her face, I'm like, I feel like she looks more dumbfounded than she looks mystified. I wanted to change the expression from being less like to more like, ooh. This one I originally wanted her to be kind of almost like joyous and a childlike whimsy. That changes by the end. It does change a little bit by the end. You'll see throughout this drawing, I was really fussing, like massively fussing with the facial expression. For a long time, it just was not sitting right with me. There was something off about the mouth. I do fix it at the end. So if the mouth is annoying you, it really annoyed me. As I was working on this drawing, I was also keeping some notes of talking points I knew I wanted to mention eventually when I made a video about this. And one of the things that I wrote down was that this sketch took me 3 hours. And it's not like this is a very detailed drawing. Sometimes we just have bad art days. No one is immune to bad art days. It gets all of us, okay? Also, when I know I'm recording my process and doing a time lapse, it makes me a little bit more like on edge, because I'm even more embarrassed if I'm making mistakes or just not drawing well. You know, when you'd be in school and you'd be drawing and you'd be doing fine, admit it, one of the classmates is like looking over your shoulder, you lose all of your drawing capabilities. That's sometimes how I feel when I'm doing time lapses. Sometimes we just have really bad art days, and something I've learned, especially now I'm doing commission work and I'm drawing so much more than I was a few years ago, there are a few things that I can pinpoint, for me at least, that causes a bad art day. Sometimes drawing something new. Sometimes if you're feeling really tired or impatient with your art, I notice when I'm kind of getting to the end of the day and I feel like I need to rush it, I draw so much worse. The more rushed you feel with your art, the more annoyed you get with yourself, the worse your drawing is going to be, at least for me. So sometimes I have to kind of recognize that and be like, okay, I need to take like a 20-minute break, go do something else, maybe go have a snack, maybe I'm a little hangry. Sometimes you might need to take a longer break, just you need to draw the next day. I do find I do that a lot because I am very stubborn, a hyper focusing kind of person where I will just sit and do the same thing for hours. I think learning when to take a break and when to give your eyes a little bit of a reset, because drawing annoyed is probably never going to actually be as productive as you think it is. Sometimes you also might be in a stage with your art where your observational skill has increased, but your physical skill hasn't matched yet. So you maybe have an increased eye for what you know you want to do, but your skill just hasn't matched that yet. That can create more of a space to be annoyed with your art because you're now noticing more errors, or you're noticing more of a gap between what you want to achieve and what you're actually able to achieve. Sometimes, and a lot of us do this, sometimes we don't warm up, and I do know that warming up massively helps my art, and I try to do as much as I can. But even after all those reasons, sometimes you just have a bad art day where just doing a simple sketch feels really, really, really hard. I also noticed that if I'm having a bad art day, sketches are always the main thing to really be impeded upon. I personally find the sketching phase the most brain heavy for me. It's a lot of fussing, it's a lot of fixing and adjusting and being like, why does this look like crap? And then having to fix that. Once I get to line art and rendering, I usually feel like pretty set, pretty good. So bad art days usually are mainly affecting my sketch. And unfortunately for me, because sketching is already something that I feel like I kind of have to drag myself through to like get to a point where I really like it. When the very start of your drawing is starting off on kind of a crummy note, it can kind of set a pissy tone for the rest of the drawing. And so that's something I always have to be really cognizant of when I'm drawing, is not getting too annoyed with the sketch. I need to go get my cat because she is losing her crap at my door. 1 second. Come on. She might also just chill on the blanket, because I try, whenever I'm doing voiceovers for my TikToks, I like to lay some blankets on the ground just to soak up a little bit of the echo. So she might abandon me for the soft blanket, because what is a human compared to something fuzzy and soft? There she is. Here, maybe I'll move over slightly so you guys can see her. So the sketch, the liner, and the first little bit of the rendering was what I did months ago when I first started this drawing. It feels so weird to work on something you haven't touched in a really long time. As if I haven't touched a drawing in a really long time, it's usually staying abandoned. I usually do not revisit it. Unless it's just a sketch, then I can usually rework it enough if I liked the original idea and design. But if I did anything past a sketch, like liner and rendering, usually it stays in the abyss of my files and never to be touched again. I feel like in the last year and a half, my art style has really evened out and it's stayed really consistent. I think I've finally found what makes me really, really happy to draw and how I like to stylize faces and render and everything. And I still like to change up my process a bit and the techniques I use, but I feel like I've really solidified in this last year and a half my art style. But before that, I was kind of playing around, which a lot of artists do. I started off doing more vibrant and cel shaded stuff, and then I had a period where I was doing more soft, airbrushy kind of rendering. That always made it really hard to be able to go back and work on stuff I haven't touched in like a year plus, because my style had changed so much. I think because my style has evened out a lot, I didn't have to do too much fussing where I felt like it wasn't going to be cohesive with how I draw now. But if I was to redraw this again, one of the things I know I would change is I would want to bring more hair over her shoulder on her right side. Right now it's just the left side. I also would change the sleeves. I wanted to make the sleeves poofier and more flowy, but I feel like they look more dense. I really struggle to capture clothing weight and fabric. That's something I'm still trying to work on. It is not one of my strengths at the moment. So I really did have to fight with myself to not change a lot of those compositional things, because I knew as soon as I started getting into the realm of like, okay, I'm just gonna like redraw this and I'm gonna redraw this, then the drawing would start to become more unenjoyable for me and more annoying. And I knew I'd already put it off for so long. I needed to get it done, and I needed to accept it for what it was and know it's still going to be better than the original. At least I think it is. I hope so. But I did have to really let myself be uncomfortable with that. The main thing that I started changing just with the liner was just thickening up the lines. When I started this drawing, it was at a period where I was kind of playing around with a little bit of a thinner line art style. And while I do like that, I kind of feel like it gives it a little bit more of that cinematic look to it. But lately I've been going back to using a little heavier of a hand with my liner. I'm using the liner to do the like deepest shadows. So the mouth was really pissing me off in this drawing like a lot. I was really fighting with myself on it. Like I said earlier, I wanted to change the expression from being less what I think looks dumbfounded to more ooh. I just felt like it was looking really weird. I couldn't figure it out for a while why it was looking so awkward, and I tried having the mouth closed and the mouth open. Eventually, and I don't know if we're at this part with the speed draw yet, what I adjusted was just the corners of her mouth. I realized that the lines were way too long. Stylistically, I do like to make the corner lines longer for like pulled expressions or things like smirks and stuff. I know our mouths don't actually do that. I just like to do it. But I realized having those lines so stretched out was what was making it look so odd for me. And I was glad that I did finally nail that. I did want to make sure when it came to the rendering of this that I was keeping it pretty consistent with how the original looked. The dark purple with this like pop of color. I love like the pinkish tone on the skin, so I wanted to make sure that I definitely made that magic happen again with the overlay layers in the end. I was really looking forward to being able to play around with the fairy dragon and making it look a little bit different. You can see I definitely went with more of a butterfly wing style. I also did a very different tail style. I think if I was to go in and like be okay with me redrawing some portions of this, I think the way that I would like the tail on the new one better is if I just made it a little bit smaller. I feel like it looks a little heavy. Maybe I'll go in and later and try and make the tail a little bit more translucent. That might help lighten up the feel of it. I'm trying to decide if I like the tail better from that original one or this one. One thing I'm also considering going back and adding in was I do like that in the original drawing she had a few different colors going throughout her hair. Now that's also because that was just my old style of drawing hair, was doing like every single strand and then doing a bunch of different colors. One of my favorite parts that I get to with a drawing, aside from liner is like my favorite part to do. When I get to the end of the rendering and I get to do the overlay layers, that is where the magic happens. There's so many times when I'm working on the coloring and the shading of something and I'm feeling a little kind of meh about it, and I just keep telling myself it's gonna look good when I get to the overlay layers. It's gonna be good. You just gotta hold on. I absolutely adore using overlay, and it absolutely for me like finishes off my drawing. Not only do I use overlay at the end for being able to enhance the lighting, I also like to do a little bit of color correction with it. I usually hit the eyes, sometimes I'll hit a little bit of the hair, maybe not the full hair, but like the high points and the highlights of the hair. I usually like to hit all of the skin. I really love being able to use overlay to make skin look very glowy and have a little bit of the edges blur out onto the clothes and the hair. It just makes things look magical and ethereal. I also like going over any metal and jewelry just to give a little bit more of a shine and a luster. One of my tips, if you feel like you really struggle to make your characters look cohesive with the background, whether it's a solid color or like a textured background like this, or it's like a fully illustrated scene, what I love to do is just color picking that predominant background color and really lightly going on the silhouette of the character and just slowly building up a little bit of is it vignette? Vignette? I always forget how to pronounce that word. But building up a little bit of that gradient around it, it just helps your character blend into the background a little bit more. But because you're usually using either a darker or a lighter color than the actual character themselves, it also just brings the focus back to the center. I feel like one of the things that really makes my style, aside from just how I draw faces and stylize characters, is the finishing touches that I like to use at the end. I really love using the overlay layers. I also really like doing a bit of a noise filter. I love adding a little bit of that texture in. If you want to know how I do the noise layer, I do like a mid-tone gray, set it to overlay, and then I just put the noise filter on and play around with the opacity. Just adds just a little bit of texture, and it's just so nice. But I really love playing around with overlay at the end. I just really like how overlay looks. I have said overlay so many times while recording this. One of the things I also wanted to add, some little streaks. My soup brain cannot think of what the word is called, but just like some like motion, and then doing some dust. I did want to amp up the dust a little bit more, and I wanted to make sure that the particles of dust almost kind of went in like rings and circles, but make it like really subtle, again just to bring a little bit of that focus back on the face. I think that's all I wanted to mention whilst drawing. Final thoughts time. What did I like better about the original? What did I like better about this one? What would I change if I was going to draw it again? I am still not fully vibing with the expression. It's still annoying me a little bit. However, it is better than what it was in the middle of the drawing. I don't know, let me know what you think. So if I was to redraw this again in 4 years' time, I gotta figure out the face. But I'm happy with the actual stylization of the face. Very much my current style. I'm still uncertain about the fairy dragon, of which concept I prefer more. I definitely like having the iridescent wings. I think adding that additional little pop of color made it fun. I definitely like that. I do like the fairy wings, but there's just a part of me that's vibing with the shape of the original wings more, as well as I like that I made the lines on the wings themselves a little bit more pronounced in the original. And I think I'm gonna go in and adjust the opacity of the tail because it just looks a little too unbalanced. I also mentioned this earlier, but I would definitely change the sleeve. I really got to work on my textures. I also know, I want to say, I know the folds and the lines of the sleeves and just the dress in general, they're not that good. I have to admit that one of my flaws as an artist is really neglecting study time for clothes. That's something I actually have to like make myself sit down and really learn and study, is clothing folds. I feel like I BS it sometimes, and it can be very obvious. And I would just want to try and translate the weight of the sleeve to not make it look like it was filled by a cement truck. I do, however, like the overall redesign of the dress. The sleeves, I like that I added the like flouncy frilly parts around the shoulders. I feel like that really suits it. I loved how the bow came out, adding a little bit of that iridescent shine to it. You can probably also see that earlier I was playing around with whether I wanted to have the cuffs be colored or not. In the original, they're the same color as the sleeve, and so I was really going back and forth about, do I leave them the same color as the sleeve? Do I make them match the neckline? I think I like them matching the neckline, but I guess we'll see whenever this gets turned into a print, which I decided to keep. I do like the earrings. I think I would redesign them, to be honest, though, if I was to redraw this. I do like it having a larger silhouette, but again, I just feel like it looks a little too heavy. I feel like now that I've lowered the neckline compared to the original, maybe next time I'll add a little necklace in. I think that might be a little nice touch. I am glad too that I was able to still capture like the same type of lighting and the color composition and the same kind of effect to it. I'm very happy that I was able to get that across. And overall, I do like the new drawing a lot better. That would really suck, spending 3 hours on a sketch and all this time just to like the original one better. It is really cool to be able to see a direct comparison of what my style used to be and what it is now. Finding your art style, I know, is such an important topic to artists, right? That's such an identity thing for us. It literally is the thing that defines us and lets us know whose art is by who. And I know there can almost be this like rush and urgency to find your art style, and I'm telling you, sometimes it's just gonna change. Sometimes you mean for it to change. Sometimes it just starts changing on its own. I'd love to eventually do a video talking about how my art style has morphed throughout the years, because I came full circle, so I'm back at a similar place to where I started, but just just with a revamped style and how I like to draw, and obviously like my actual skill set has improved. When you're an artist and it's really easy to be hard on yourself and feel like you suck at doing everything, to have that direct example of like, look how much I've improved is rather quite nice. Anyways, thank you so much for joining me today. If this is your first time happening upon the channel, I mean, it's kind of also my first time. This is only my second video, so I guess both of us are new. If you would like to see more of my art, I do have Instagram and TikTok, which I will put on the screen. One day I will figure out how to not awkwardly end a video, but that day is not today. Anyways, goodbye. Oh, I think she wants to play with the microphone. Oh, got some belly rubbies. Got some belly rubbies in, eh? I very much. Goodbye, Sybil. If you guys would like a little BTS behind the scenes, I put down this Marcus blanket. This is my Marcus blanket. It was given to me as a Christmas gift. Robert. I need to go eat. I am shaking. My back hurts. My head hurts. I am old. Ouch. Goodbye.